Hi everybody, my name's Dave, thanks for joining me, and tonight I am going to make a video on tapping holes, threading bolts, and why you are using the wrong tools. I have a two-part theory of why we've progressed away from taps and die sets. The first is they're cheaper to make, and the second is more to do with copying them rather than their manufacture. So not all taps and die sets are equal. Not by any stretch of the imagination are tap and die sets even tap and die sets. Most are thread chasers or thread repair kits. But a few that are genuine are thousands of dollars. But why? Why are they so expensive? So where am I getting my information from? To work out the issue, we need to go back to basics. There are 3 taps and 1 die in a set. Taps consist of a first cut or a taper tap, a second or intermediary, and thirdly a bottoming tap. Dies, especially the larger dies, need to have a slot in them. But it gets worse. There are several types of taps, from high carbon steel to tungsten. All taps and dies should be made from high speed steel, or HSS as it's well known. And that does not mean you can say it is what they are when they're not. Manufacturers will put on HSS when they're only carbon steel. How is anybody going to know? Steel is already an alloy. Well, that is correct. Steel is an alloy of iron. Steel is divided into 2 groups, low and high alloy content. Most steel is low alloy, where the simplest is 0.1 to 1% carbon, and these are called carbon steels. However, most steel alloys have other metals in them. Some common alloyant metals that are alloyed with steel are manganese, nickel, chromium, molybdenum, vanadium, silicon, and boron. Some lesser alloyants are aluminium. For our American friends, it's aluminium, not aluminum. Cobalt, copper, cerium, lead, niobium, titanium, tungsten, tin, zinc, and zirconium. So what is the difference between the steels? When you start with cheap, poor quality steel, the end result is cheap, poor quality steel. Note China. And what is the difference between the steels? High-speed steel, HSS, is an alloy made up of iron, chromium, tungsten, vanadium, molybdenum, and cobalt. High-speed steel is a higher resistance to heat than other steels due to its chromium content, which helps it resist oxidization and elevated temperatures up to 1300 degrees C. Other elements makes it more wear resistant than regular high carbon steel. It makes it ideal for use in high speed cutting tools like drills and end mills, as well as in cold work applications like taps and die sets. High speed steel also retains its edge much better than regular high carbon steel. It's up to 20 times stronger. That makes it perfect for applications where sharpness matters. Think precision, matching, or tooling operations on delicate materials such as plastics or aluminium alloys. High carbon steel is an alloy that contains up to 2% carbon. I see I've got my helper with me. It is made by combining iron and carbon, as well as other elements such as manganese, sulfur, and phosphorus. These types of steel are known for its strength and durability. It is heat treatable, which means the metal can be hardened or soft depending on the application. High carbon steel is often used in applications where strength and hardness are required, such as saw blades, drill bits, axles, piston pins, punches, and chisels. The main difference between high carbon steel and high speed steel is the amount of carbon present. The higher carbon content in carbon steel makes it harder than high speed steel. The higher carbon content in high carbon steel makes it harder than high speed steel. However, this also makes it more brittle and less able to withstand impact. High speed steel, on the other hand, has better impact resistance due to the addition of other elements, such as chromium and molybdenum. The uses of both of these. High carbon steel is typically used for applications where hardness is required, such as knives or saw blades. It can also be used for springs and bearings. High-speed steel is often used for cutting tools, and it can maintain a sharp edge at high temperatures. It is also used in drill bits and taps where it resists wearing from abrasion. Cost of manufacture. High carbon steel is typically less expensive than high speed steel as it does not contain additional elements found in high speed steel. However, the cost difference will vary depending on specific grades and each type of steel. Why do dies have a slot? Dies have a slot. Why? Well, if you look at a die holder, you'll see it has 3 screws. So even though the Chinese have gone away from the slot, you still see the holders with the 3 screws, although they've been replaced with 3 screws and not a grub screw in the center. The center hole should be a grub screw with an Allen head. The die should have 2 countersunk holes and a slot between them. The slot has a grub screw that locates in it. The other 2 hold the die in place. You should be able to unscrew the outer 2 and screw in the middle grub screw to open the die as opposed to close the die. This allows for varying depths of cuts for gradual forming of the thread. Many die holders have 3 screws, but do the manufacturers know why? Probably not. So the vast majority of tap and die sets are missing the term chaser or cleaning from their title because that's what they are, thread chasers or cleaners. If the alloy dies had a slot, they would likely break. I have been in engineering for 50 plus years and I have never seen a high-speed steel die break because it was adjusted incorrectly. I have seen broken alloy dies. What are the vast majority of tap and die sets? They are tap and die chasers or die nuts, which are specifically designed for chasing or cleaning threads. The dies do not have a slot because die chasers don't require one. They are only cleaning the thread, not cutting one. So what is my theory about this that I said at the start? The Chinese are renowned for copying things, and taps and dies are no exception to this. To keep prices down, they have made taps and dies out of carbon steel and relabeled them as high-speed steel. Who is going to know? The former is harder but far more brittle and snaps easier, cannot take the impact of the adjustments. Then they thought, I know, let's make these tap and die chasers, but conveniently forget the word chaser and we can sell them as tap and die sets. Also, we don't need 3 taps, just 2. And we don't need a slot, so that'll be cheaper too. Carbon steel is cheaper to make too because it does not require additional metals, and whilst it sounds better, it's far too brittle. Once these flood the market, they become the norm, and people buy them thinking they're getting cheap tap and die sets, but in reality they're getting cheaply made Chinese garbage of cheap metal taps and die chasers. Then companies like Vevor and Horusy come along and make taps and die sets, think they are doing a good job and they are just making the better made versions. But these are still the wrong items. So what should you buy? You should buy something made by a manufacturer who can be trusted, preferably Australian, or at least European or American. You need high-speed steel taps and dies, where these are 3 taps and 1 die with a slot in it. Also, a die wrench needs a grub screw in the center. Be careful because these less reputable companies with just high-speed steel, instead of them actually being high-speed steel, they'll just write it on there. High-speed steel taps are ground where carbon steel is just machined. Genuine HSS sets can be used to cut threads, chase threads, and will last a lifetime. Whereas if you buy carbon steel or if they contain tungsten, they will break and not last anywhere near as long, especially if you try and cut threads with them. The larger the thread, the more likely this will happen. Cost. A good set of high-speed steel taps and dies made by a reputable manufacturer will cost somewhere between $500 and $2,000. A set of alloy taps and die chasers will cost anything from $35 to $2,000. But don't be fooled. There are cheap sets for ridiculously high prices, likely trying to catch someone out. I wouldn't pay more than $150 even for a good set of chasers. I think your best option is to buy a thread chasing kit. The cheaper the better, and then purchase a high-speed steel taps and dies as required, and then replace the ones in the kit with them. And the title of it was Where to Buy Taps That Are Not Garbage. Hey everyone, I'm not a machinist, but I lurk here pretty frequently. I'm trying to get into the hobby machining at a local market space. I'm taking on a project that will require tapping several different size holes in 6061 aluminium. So where do you buy taps that you want to last more than 1 hole? Because this has been my experience so far. Thanks in advance. Okay, so I wanted to clarify the problem I've had with cheap taps and die sets, is that the teeth get extremely dull after 1 single use, sometimes 2. So how to use a set of taps correctly? You'll need to drill the hole using the correct drill size. Start with the taper tap. Ensure that your tap is vertical in the hole and above the hole. The taper tap should go into the hole a little wide, so we always start with a taper tap or first tap. Using the tap wrench, after applying cutting fluid, turn the tap until it starts to bite into the metal. You may need to apply some slight downward pressure to get it started. Once it has started, creating a positive screw action, turn the tap one full turn and then turn it backwards quarter of a turn for every full turn clockwise. This cuts off any swarf and sends it to the bottom of the hole. If the hole being tapped is flat bottomed, use the air blow tool to clear any excess swarf from the hole or the tap faces. Once the tap gets as far as it's going or hits the bottom, stop and rewind the tap out of the hole. Using the second tap, do the same procedure until it reaches the bottom of the hole and remove the tap again. Using the bottoming tap, do the same again until it reaches the bottom of the hole and stop. Remove the tap. Test the bolt in the hole after blowing it out. How to use the die correctly. Put the correct die into the die wrench and then set the center grub screw to open the die. So how you do this is you leave out the two outer screws, screw in the center screw so it opens it right up, and then two screws on either side of it to nip it in and hold it in place. Note that the die holder must be used with the larger hole where you inserted the die to the bottom. This is to stop the die being pushed out of the hole. Apply cutting fluid and ensuring the die remains horizontal, turn the wrench while applying a slight downward force. Once the thread starts cutting, confirm that the die is horizontal and then continue. Turn the wrench one full turn and back quarter of a turn to remove any swarf, blowing it with the air gun as required. Remember to keep lubricant on there. Continue until the die reaches the distance you wish the thread to go. Remove the die and loosen the outer two screws. Back off the center grub screw until the die retracts slightly. Cut the thread using the same technique. Nip up the two screws. Cut the thread using the same technique until the correct distance is reached. Carry out the same procedure using the two outer screws to make the thread cut smaller. So basically this is the third attempt, so what you should do is you should back off the grub screw right out, tighten up the two outer screws to make the hole the smallest, and then recut the thread using the same technique until the correct distance is reached. Make one final pass over the thread and clean the area to remove the cutting compound. Test the thread using a nut or by screwing it into the hole. Clean all the tools and place them back in their box. Thank you for listening to my rant. At least it isn't the Americans this time. My oil leak is still there on my car. I'm going to use an endoscope camera to try and trace the leak. I've applied a rocker 4 times now and 3 different RTVs, so it can't be that. I couldn't do the work today because it was been raining all day, so tomorrow hopefully I'll do it, and if not, I'll see you on the next video. Bye now.